Hello everyone. I'm very sorry I can't be with you at the HEA conference at Westminster today. I had what I think is called a diary malfunction, or I'm just getting old and can't keep track of things. Hopefully you'll have heard by now about the video recordings we have of a group of students with experience at Westminster of both blended learning and more traditional face-to-face delivery. Their frank comparison of the two experiences are, in our view, very insightful. They're also quite exciting if, like us, you believe that many inherent features of well-designed online distance learning opportunities are key for any learning situation. There are three themes I'd like to focus on in this short video that have come out of the work we've done with these students. The first is the significance of structure. The second is learning approaches and lectures. And the third are some observations on the student community. So first, the significance to students of structure, of organisation, of knowing where they are in a course and what is going to happen next. What comes across very strongly is the contrast in these student experiences of going from a highly organised work plan for learning online to face-to-face situations where quite often, especially in large classes, there is a sense of disorganisation and of not knowing what to expect and therefore how to prepare. Let's hear from the students.
Distance learning, it was a little bit more structured. What did we call learning objectives? Performers. Every week we'd have a performer of the specific key topics, of what you get from that week. And of course we don't really, I don't know, we do in some lectures, don't we? They sometimes have learning objectives at the beginning of the lecture. This is what you know, these are the key core ideas that you need to get your head around from this lecture. And they're really useful for when you go away and you do your extended reading. And the lectures that are not that structured are difficult when you go back to your notes afterwards.
Let me say something now about learning approaches and lectures. I must admit I'm not a huge fan of too many lectures, so I'm probably a little bit biased. I stopped lecturing to my genetics students over 15 years ago and made video recordings instead, so flipping my classrooms as best I could by focusing on a very different style of classroom session. However, linked again to structure and organisation of an intended learning event, but also to study habit and how I learn, here is some of what these students have told us of the pros and cons of large lectures versus recordings and how the two different experiences affect what they do to try to learn something. Finally now, a word about student community. I hear a lot about the importance of community on campus and how having a strong face-to-face ethos for learning delivery enhances this. However, it is clear from what we have heard from these students that this is not the case for all groups of students. We've heard how these students thought that their face-to-face delivered degree would be just like their blended learning experience, only with more people to actually speak to. Well, think again. It's just not that simple, as the students tell us here.
I do think that there's more content. When we were studying online, there was more content in the presentations or the PDFs or whatever we were reading than we get from going to an actual lecture. I think it's probably harder now to know that you've gained the proper understanding, because when we had the learning outcomes, you could check, you could make sure that you could answer something about each of those topics. Whereas now, you come out of a lecture and you may be unsure about what it was you were actually supposed to have learned, what were the key points, and just hope that you've grasped the right bits.
Can I just clarify something with you there,
Yes.
just for the purpose of the recording? When you say learning outcomes,
From when we did the distance
learning
learning.
outcomes for a specific session.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what.
So we used to get the pro formas that had between 4 and 8 learning outcomes for that one session. And you knew that they were the key points that you had to take from it. Whereas at the moment, you've got a lecture where so many things are being thrown from different tangents, and you're supposed to be able to pick out what are the pertinent points. So you may not know that what you think was the important point was the important point.
I personally think that I was reading more online. I did completely stop, but I'm only going back to reading when there is an assignment due or when we've got to go back to some revision. But I'm not reading at all during the week, and I'm doing more listening here, but not taking much in as well.
It was online, and so was it Linda?
Linda
Giving the lecture, and the slides were on there. So they'd be giving a full lecture, and they were about an hour long, weren't they? And of course you can pause them. If you miss a bit, you can pause it and go back. Or if they were saying something that you didn't quite understand, you can go over it as many times as you want to.
Because I'd sit there, I'd be watching it, I'd be listening to her, I'd have whatever source book, I'd have my notes, you could pause it, you could look something up, so you were reading more, but you were learning at the same time. So you weren't just learning what she was saying, but you were checking up on other things at the same time. I honestly think that was the best one module that we did.
And you could run through the lecture twice, you could run through it, take notes from what they were saying, and then there'd be the extra reading material. You can go away and do the reading material, and then you could run through it again, and then you might pull out other things that you didn't write down the first time.
Finally now, a word about student community. I hear a lot about the importance of community on campus and how having a strong face-to-face ethos for learning delivery enhances this. However, it is clear from what we have heard from these students that this is not the case for all groups of students. We've heard how these students thought that their face-to-face delivered degree would be just like their blended learning experience, only with more people to actually speak to. Well, think again. It's just not that simple, as the students tell us here.
If I'd have just come in this year, not knowing anyone, I think there's probably, not counting these guys, there's probably about 2 or 3 people that I speak to in the lecture theatre. I think the fact that we were such a unique group at the beginning has given us such a strength throughout and a support network for each other that I don't think we'd have had if we'd have gone straight into a classroom environment with 200 other people.
Absolutely.
If you look in the large lecture theatre, there tend to be little groups of 2 or 3 who are sitting together. So I do think you would probably have a couple of people that you would be with, whether they know each other from outside or socially or whatever. But I honestly do think I would just sit there by myself and then leave the lecture and go home or whatever. I don't, because we come out of a lecture, we'll go and find a computer room, we'll grab something to eat, we'll chat about what's coming or what we've just been doing. So I think that's probably a more important part. But I don't think we would have had that if we had just come in as full-time students.
So in summary, there are several things about an online learning experience that deliverers of face-to-face learning may wish to take into account. First, the importance of structure and organisation or context of a class. Second, the negative effect that certain types of lecture can have on effective study methods that have been built up through other delivery modes. And third, the potential for online communities to support students more effectively than the crowded, busy campus. That's all from me for now. Thank you very much for listening. I'll hand you back to my co-presenters.